The morning of December 8th, 1941. The sun had barely risen over Clark Field in the Philippines. American pilots, their aircraft lined up on the tarmac, were still reeling from the news of Pearl Harbor, received hours earlier. Suddenly, the sky above them filled with a terrifying distinctive whine. 108 Japanese Mitsubishi A6M Zeros, sleek and deadly, plunged from the heavens. In minutes, the American Air Force in the Philippines was annihilated. Pilots scrambled for cover, only to watch their P-40 Warhawks and B-17 bombers erupt in fireballs. The surprise was absolute. The destruction total. This wasn't just a tactical victory, it was a declaration. Japan's air power, spearheaded by its formidable new fighter, had arrived, and it was devastating. For the next year, the legend of the Japanese Zero grew with every shattering Allied defeat. It was an aircraft of breathtaking maneuverability, astonishing range, and potent firepower. Japanese pilots, honed by years of combat experience over China, seemed invincible, executing daring feats of aerial acrobatics that left their Western opponents bewildered and outmatched. How could a nation so far removed from the Western industrial powerhouses produce such a marvel? And more importantly, how could it be stopped? This was the central strategic dilemma facing the Allies in the brutal early years of the Pacific War. The Zero, officially the Mitsubishi A6M Raisin, or Type 0 carrier fighter, was a product of Japan's unique strategic vision and technological gambles. Designed by the brilliant Jiro Horikoshi, the requirements were audacious for the late 1930s, a light, fast, long-range fighter that could operate from aircraft carriers and outmaneuver any opponent. Horikoshi and his team achieved this by prioritizing agility and reach above almost everything else. To keep the weight down, crucial structural elements were sacrificed. The Zero lacked self-sealing fuel tanks and armor plating for the pilot. It was a glass cannon. But in the hands of Japan's elite pre-war pilots, it was a weapon without peer. These pilots, like Saburo Sakai, Hiroyoshi Nishizawa, and Kenji Yanagiya, were living legends, having refined their skills in brutal aerial campaigns over China. They were among the most experienced and lethal aviators in the world, and they flew an aircraft perfectly suited to their aggressive dogfighting doctrine. From the infamous attack on Pearl Harbor, where Zeros provided air cover for the bomber fleets, through the swift conquest of the Philippines, Malaya, and the Dutch East Indies, the Zero dominated. American, British, Dutch, and Australian forces found their obsolete aircraft and poorly trained pilots slaughtered. In countless engagements, the Zero outclimbed, outturned, and outran Allied fighters like the British Buffalo, the Dutch Hawk 75, and even the American P-40 Warhawk and the early models of the Grumman F-4F Wildcat. The consequences were immediate and catastrophic. The Philippines fell, Singapore surrendered, and much of Southeast Asia became a Japanese dominion. The Imperial Japanese Navy and Army Air Forces achieved air superiority over vast swathes of the Pacific, allowing their forces to advance with near impunity. The psychological impact on Allied aircrews was immense. They faced a foe that seemed to defy the laws of physics, often returning to base with tales of incredible evasive maneuvers and frustratingly robust armament. The Zero was perceived as indestructible, a myth fueled by its high kill ratios and the devastating losses suffered by Allied forces. But beneath this veneer of invincibility lay a profound strategic contradiction. Japan's industrial capacity, while impressive for an Asian nation, was dwarfed by that of the United States. The meticulous, handcrafted construction of the Zero, designed for ultimate performance, was ill-suited for mass production. Each aircraft was a testament to precision engineering, but they rolled off assembly lines slowly. This was a critical vulnerability that Japan's initial victories masked. As the war escalated, the Japanese aviation industry struggled to replace losses. The pre-war pilot training program, while producing highly skilled aviators, was long and rigorous. It could not adapt to the wartime attrition rates. As the elite pilots were lost, their replacements lacked the experience and refined skills to fully exploit the Zero's capabilities. This was a ticking time bomb. For the Allies, particularly the United States, the early months of 1942 were a desperate scramble. American engineers and strategists devoured every scrap of intelligence about the Zero. They knew its strengths, its agility, its range, its speed, but they also desperately sought its weaknesses. The early F-4F Wildcat, though sturdy and heavily armed, was slower and less maneuverable than the Zero. Yet, American pilots, through sheer grit and ingenuity, began to devise tactics to counter the Japanese advantage. One of the most effective was the Thack Weave, developed by Lieutenant Commander John Thack. It involved two Wildcat fighters flying in close proximity, crisscrossing each other's paths when attacked. If a Zero pursued one Wildcat, it would fly directly into the firing line of its wingman. This simple, brilliant maneuver drastically improved the Wildcats' combat effectiveness and highlighted the importance of teamwork and tactical innovation. Pilots like Major Gregory "Pappy" Boynton and Joe Foss honed these tactics, exploiting the Wildcats' ruggedness and superior diving speed by employing boom and zoom attacks, hitting the Zero from above and then escaping before it could engage in a dogfight. These tactics were effective stopgaps, allowing Allied pilots to survive and even win individual engagements. But they did not fundamentally shift the balance of power. The Zero still reigned supreme in the skies, particularly over vast areas of the Pacific, where American air power was thinly spread. The true game changer, however, was quietly being developed in the factories of Grumman, a company that had a reputation for building tough, dependable naval aircraft. The breakthrough moment for Allied intelligence came in June 1942 after the Battle of Midway. A pristine Mitsubishi A6M Zero crash-landed on Akutan Island in the Aleutians, was recovered by American forces. This Akutan Zero was painstakingly repaired and flown by Allied test pilots. Its secrets were laid bare. The engineers at Grumman carefully studied its construction, its strengths, and most importantly, its inherent weaknesses: lack of pilot protection, self-sealing fuel tanks, and structural vulnerability. This was a pivotal moment. The myth of the invincible Zero was shattered by cold, hard data. This discovery confirmed what many suspected: the Zero, for all its agility, was fragile. It burned easily and offered its pilot almost no protection. Armed with this knowledge, American designers and strategists moved with renewed purpose. They didn't seek to out-zero the Zero. Instead, they sought to build a fighter that capitalized on American strengths: industrial muscle, powerful engines, and a doctrine that valued pilot protection and structural integrity. The resulting aircraft, developed in record time, was the Grumman F-6F Hellcat. It was a fighter designed from the ground up to destroy the Zero. Leroy Grumman and his team understood that while maneuverability was a virtue, it wasn't the only one. The Hellcat was big, robust, and powerful. It packed a massive Pratt & Whitney R2800 double wasp engine, giving it superb climbing ability and speed at altitude. It mounted 6.50 caliber machine guns, a devastating punch that could tear a lightly constructed Zero apart. Crucially, it featured thick armor plating for the pilot and self-sealing fuel tanks, offering a level of survivability that the Zero simply could not match. The Hellcat's design philosophy was simple and brutally effective: find the Zero, climb above it, dive on it, shoot it down, and absorb any return fire. It was a strategic shift from dogfighting to energy fighting, leveraging horsepower and mass over pure agility, and it was exactly what was needed. When the F-6F Hellcat first entered combat in significant numbers in late 1943, particularly during the campaign for the Solomon Islands and later the Central Pacific, the Japanese pilots experienced a terrifying revelation. They found themselves facing an opponent that was not only fast and well armed, but also virtually impossible to shake off once engaged. The Hellcat could outclimb them, outdive them, and often outrun them in a straight line. If a Zero managed to get a burst on a Hellcat, the American aircraft frequently shrugged off the damage, its rugged construction and armor absorbing hits that would have instantly incinerated a Zero. The consequences for the Japanese were immediate and catastrophic. The skill and courage of individual Japanese pilots, once decisive, were now rendered increasingly irrelevant against the overwhelming technological and numerical superiority of the Hellcat and its well-trained pilots. The kill ratios began to reverse dramatically. Where a few American pilots had held their own against many Zeros, now Hellcat pilots were racking up kills at an astounding rate. The strategic turning point arrived with stark clarity during the Battle of the Philippine Sea in June 1944. This engagement, famously dubbed the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot by American pilots, saw hundreds of Japanese aircraft, including many Zeros, obliterated by swarms of Hellcats. Wave after wave of Japanese planes were intercepted far from the American carrier fleet, many shot down before they could even reach their targets. American Hellcat pilots claimed 426 Japanese aircraft shot down, with the loss of only 30 Hellcats in combat. This was not just a victory, it was an annihilation. This dramatic failure signaled the complete collapse of Japanese naval air power. Japan simply could not replace its experienced pilots or its aircraft at the rate they were being lost. The meticulous, time-consuming training of their pre-war aces was now a distant memory. New Japanese pilots were rushed through abbreviated training programs, often with only a fraction of the flight hours of their American counterparts. These inexperienced pilots, flying increasingly obsolete Zeros against the Hellcat juggernaut, were sent to their deaths in droves. Meanwhile, American industrial capacity continued its relentless output. While the Zero struggled to adapt, evolving through several increasingly desperate iterations like the A6M5, it remained fundamentally a lightweight, lightly protected aircraft. American factories, by contrast, churned out not only the Hellcat but also the formidable F-4U Corsair, further cementing Allied air superiority. By the end of the war, more than 12,200 Hellcats had been produced, a staggering figure compared to the Japanese output. The strategic dilemma for Japan became insurmountable. Without air superiority, their naval fleets were vulnerable, their island garrisons cut off, and their ability to defend the home islands severely compromised. The Hellcat's dominance meant that Japanese logistics, already strained, became a nightmare. Convoys were decimated, supplies choked off, and distant outposts starved. The human consequences were devastating not just for the pilots, but for the entire Japanese war effort. This continuous stream of losses, exacerbated by the Hellcat, eventually led to the most desperate measure of all, the kamikaze attacks. By late 1944, with conventional air power decimated, Japanese commanders resorted to suicide attacks, a tragic testament to the hopelessness of their situation and the overwhelming air superiority established by aircraft like the Hellcat. The pilots who launched these attacks knew they faced certain death, often flying technologically inferior aircraft against an impenetrable wall of Allied fighters and anti-aircraft fire. The story of the Japanese Zero and the American F-6F Hellcat is a profound study in historical irony and strategic contrast. Japan, an island nation with limited resources, achieved extraordinary initial success by betting on technological elegance, pilot skill, and aggressive doctrine. The Zero was a brilliant aircraft for its time, a true marvel of engineering that allowed Japan to dominate the Pacific for a crucial period. However, this very brilliance contained the seeds of its downfall. Its design, optimized for maneuverability and range, prioritized performance over survivability and ease of manufacture. This made it a formidable weapon in the hands of experienced pilots, but a rapidly dwindling asset in a protracted war of attrition. The focus on individual pilot quality, while admirable, could not scale to meet the demands of a global conflict. The United States, by contrast, leveraged its immense industrial capacity and a pragmatic design philosophy that valued robustness, power, and pilot protection. The Hellcat, a more powerful, more heavily armed, and more durable aircraft, may not have been as aesthetically graceful or as inherently agile as the Zero, but it was built to win the war of attrition. It reflected a strategy of overwhelming force, mass production, and continuous adaptation. The arrival of the Hellcat did not just change the tide of the air war, it fundamentally altered the strategic landscape of the Pacific. It grounded Japan's naval air power, paved the way for island-hopping campaigns, and ultimately hastened the end of the war. The Zero, once the feared harbinger of Japanese dominance, became a symbol of a nation's initial strategic brilliance overwhelmed by a vastly superior industrial and technological response. It was a transformation in the very nature of aerial warfare, where the nimble artistry of the early war gave way to the brute force and overwhelming numbers of the later conflict, forever altering the balance of power in the skies.